Alright, from what you've read so far on The Alchemist, do you like it? Do you dislike it? You like it, and it's okay. Anyone does not like it? Interesting. Is there anyone that does not like it at all? Okay, well, that's good. Why do you like it or find it interesting, or why do you not hate it? You can understand it? Yeah, the language is very simple and very basic, which is part of what makes it a lot of it beautiful, and simple language is often sometimes the best language, especially when you're trying to communicate a message, which Coelho is trying to do in this book. What else do you like about it besides the fact that it's not too complicated?
It's got a good message.
What do you think the author is trying to say, or what kind of messages do you think he's trying to impart to the reader? Huh?
Go for your goals.
Right. Can you sense any type of religious vibe in here? And that would be, which religion would you imagine? Which religion does he mostly draw upon, or does it most closely resemble your best guess?
Catholicism.
Well, Catholicism is a form of Christianity.
Well,
Right. Right. But it's more Christian influence than anything else. And that kind of leads me into what I wanted to mention about the prologue that I wish I could have touched on the last time, but we just didn't get a chance to get into it. I don't think. It's been a couple weeks. I didn't see y'all last week. So in the prologue, we're introduced to the Alchemist. And if you guys are halfway through the book so far, have you met the Alchemist yet besides the prologue? Shouldn't have met the Alchemist, because he doesn't show up till towards about 3/4 of the way through the book is when you actually see the Alchemist and have some type of dialogue with the Alchemist. Now we are introduced. That's what makes kind of the prologue interesting, because we're introduced to the Alchemist. We're introduced to a certain theme that's going to run throughout the book, and kind of how the Alchemist views the world, which is important. Now we have the story of Narcissus here in the prologue, which is interesting as well, because he takes us. I mean, have any of you heard the story of Narcissus? Okay, well, never. Well, you know what they mean when someone calls someone narcissistic, right? Yeah, it means that they're very vain and they look. Well, this comes from Greek mythology, and the original story is that Narcissus fell in love with himself, and he fell into the pool, or fell into a pond and drowned because he loved himself so much, and then that was it. And that's why that's why you're narcissistic or whatever, or you call someone a narcissist. Now, Coelho kind of takes this story and turns it on its head, because he extends the story to the point where the pond, right, is he personifies the pond. We all know what personification is? When you take human characteristics and deposit something that's not. Okay, good. The pond is personified here, and replies back that the pond misses Narcissus, but not because there were any feelings for Narcissus, but the pond saw its own reflection in Narcissus's eyes, and so the pond was in love with the pond. Narcissus was in love with Narcissus. That's a mouthful, and Narcissus is the one that ultimately ends up drowning. Now, the Alchemist, at the end of the prologue, he thinks what a lovely story. And it's not really a lovely story, but it introduces two things to us. One is the idea, this theme that nature and humans are connected. This is very much a kind of a New Age philosophy. New Age philosophy, that whole we're all one type of idea, type of vibe. But the thing that's also introduced in the story is the method of storytelling, and using stories as a teaching method, which is, for a New Age philosophy, the idea of using stories as a teaching method is something that is very, very very old. And with all the parallels to Christianity, let me see, a block. Okay, good. With all the parallels to Christianity, this is one of the biggest ones, one of the most obvious ones, because not to get too much into the Bible or anything, but what is the difference? What marks the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Jesus.
Yes, that is the main difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament: is the existence, the coming, and the passing of Christ. Now, in the Old Testament, God was seen as, or acted much more harshly, I guess, than. I'm sorry. Can you please stop clicking that mouse? That's going to drive me insane, and I can barely think. Can you stop? Okay. Now, Jesus. I'm sorry. In the Old Testament, God is dealt with much more. In the sense that he is much more authoritative and archaic than in the New Testament, in the sense that in the Old Testament we're given what rules to follow? The Ten Commandments. In the New Testament, we're not given any commandments. Jesus comes, and whenever he starts spreading his message, he teaches everyone. He teaches all of his followers not through a list of steadfast rules, but more through stories, through parables. And that's the teachings of Jesus, called the parables of Jesus. So when someone would ask Jesus a question, instead of giving them a black and white answer, he would give them an answer, but it would be through story. More so than just saying yes or no, yes or no. Someone would ask Jesus a question, and then he would go into like a 30-minute story or an hour-long story, whatever, to teach. Now, the reason for that, and the reason that whenever we're in high school, or people that hand out New Testament, little bitty New Testament Bibles and stuff, they don't hand out the whole Bible, they hand out just the New Testament. And one of the main reasons for that, or an important reason for that, is because that the New Testament is an amazing missionary text, because it's filled with story. And stories apply to everyone. And the New Testament was supposed to be spread right across cultural boundaries. And so if you go, it doesn't take a genius to realize that if you go to a country that you go somewhere, but the culture is accepted one way, and then if you go with the Ten Commandments from the Old Testament, you say you do this, you don't do this, you do this, you don't do this, and in that culture, if it's been accepted and been practiced to do something that's against the Ten Commandments for 1,000 years, they're probably going to be resistant to change. If you go with a story that explains, that allows a person to see for themselves why something is good or why something is bad, that completely changes things. And someone can take as much away from a story, a lesson that's interwoven in a story, people can take as much away from it as they want to. If you give someone a simple rule, then first of all, if I tell you what to do versus if I explain to you through story what to do, you're gonna listen to the story, and you'll be much more open to change through the story versus me telling you, because that's just human nature. Like, who are you as an authority figure to tell me what to do, because you're not my parents, and someone that you've never heard of claiming to be God or claiming to be a religious figure, you're going to be resistant to. So story is a way to, like I said, deliver these methods where the more time you spend thinking about it, the more you can gather from it. And it's one of those things where the story of Narcissus, that's a really interesting story, and it's really spin on it, where you have the pawn seeing its own reflection in Narcissus's own eyes, and Narcissus seeing his reflection, and one of them passing. And there's a lesson to be gained from there, but I'm not really sure how to best explain that to you, because it's already been explained aptly enough through the story. And we're going to see that a little later on in here, when they're talking about going and seeing a wise man, and him having a spoonful of oil, and going around and looking at all the paintings in the guy's house, and looking at all the art and all this stuff. and he comes back and he didn't spill the oil versus spilling the oil and all that stuff. That story so adequately tells or explains how one should live their life that for me to really go into it in such detail takes away from the lesson that's being taught, because through that story I see my version of how my life should be lived through that story, but that can apply very differently from yours, because these stories are automatically filtered through. That's just like anything else we've talked about. Once something happens, once we view an event, once we read something, it's automatically filtered through our own, filter of prejudice and experience. I told you guys about the story about the clown coming in the classroom and all that, right? Okay, let's use this as an example then. There was a professor at, Columbia, Yale, one of those Ivy League schools, and he was teaching a psychology class, and he had paid an actor or something to dress up in a clown costume. And the professor came into class. It was like a 50-minute class, and so he lectured for about 15 or 20 minutes, and the clown guy was out in the hallway. And he, about 15, 20 minutes into the class, the clown man bursted in and did a backflip or screamed, yelled or something, I don't know, and then ran out right in the middle of the professor's lecture. And the professor never stopped. He just kept lecturing. And then a few minutes after the clown had left the classroom, the professor stopped and looked up from his little podium and said, "Look, I realize what just happened. I acknowledge that there's a clown that just came in. What I want you to do is take out a sheet of paper and write down what you saw to the most minute detail, exactly what you saw." And in a classroom full of 50 students, there was not one single description that matched another description. Some people thought the clown had red hair versus green hair or purple hair. Some people could agree on hair color, but they couldn't agree on big bozo nose color, or if he even had one of those big round bozo noses. Or some people thought he had a gun. Some people thought he did a kick. Some people thought he did a cartwheel. Some people thought he cussed the class out. Some people thought he did a yell. There was all these different stories, but they all witnessed the exact same thing. And that helps kind of prove or illustrate the point that we can all witness the same thing, but see it very differently. I'm sure I never told you that as a story. I mean, it's like, I didn't ask how many you've all been in some form of relationship. How many of you are married or have a girlfriend or boyfriend? Okay, and I'm not doing that to. Yeah. Now, how many of you have been in a fight with that person? Okay, well, I'm trying to get the obvious things out of the way. Okay, so in those fights, how many times, or have you ever both witnessed the same thing, both witnessed the same event, but you are absolutely sure that 100% without a doubt that you're right?
All the time.
Right. Well, me too. Because the thing about me is when I'm right, it's because I'm right. Right?
Sound like me.
Right. And nothing else matters, but it's because I'm right and there's no other need for explanation. I'm lovely in a relationship. So that's because we can both see things the same. We can both see the same thing, but automatically, as soon as we witness an event, it's filtered through our own prejudice, our own bias that we all carry with us, and our own experience that is individual and unique to each and every one of us. And so this reality gets distorted. And so one thing that what's important with these stories, like that story about the how life should be lived, or what's the meaning of life, and him going to this wise man's house and carrying the spoonful of oil around, is